You are listening to Demystifying Organizations. In partnership with McGraw-Hill Education, I'm your host, Jeff Schatten. Before we get started with today's guest, just a note, if you have questions or comments, you can email me at jeffshatten1@gmail.com. You can tweet me at jeffshatten. If you like this podcast, press the subscribe button and make sure to rate it on iTunes so that other people can find it. Gary Pisano is a professor of business administration and senior associate dean of faculty development at the Harvard Business School. Pisano is an expert in the fields of technology and operations strategy, the management of innovation and competitive strategy. His research and consulting experience span a range of industries, including aerospace, biotechnology, and pharmaceuticals, specialty chemicals, healthcare, nutrition, computers, software, telecommunications, and semiconductors. Pisano serves as an advisor to senior executives at leading companies throughout the world and has been a director of both public and private companies. Pisano is the author of over 90 articles and case studies and is an author of 6 books, including his latest, Creative Construction, The DNA of Sustained Innovation, which he discusses with me on the podcast today. I should note that there were some technical difficulties in having our conversation, so I did have to move the second half of the conversation to the phone. So the quality is a little lower, and I apologize for that. I'd like to welcome to the podcast Gary Pisano. Thanks for joining me.
Great. Thanks, Jeff, for having me.
So the title of your new book is Creative Construction, The DNA of Sustained Innovation. So what exactly is
Creative construction? Is the process by which established companies undertake transformative innovation, because the existing theories of innovation were all based on, Schumpeter's notion of creative destruction, which is the idea that as companies grow and age, they lose their innovative vigor and then are eventually displaced by, entrepreneurial companies that innovate. And
right, because our common conception is that all the innovation comes out of Silicon Valley with 4 guys in a garage or 20 people in an office building.
Yep. And that's not how, a lot of innovation does come out of it, but not does come out that way, but not all of it does. And in fact, we have lots of examples through both recent and distant history of fairly large organizations doing transformative innovation. I like to remind people that, when Apple launched the iPhone, it was a $24 billion company. Its revenues were $24 billion a year. That's not a small company. When Amazon launched Amazon Web Services in 2004, it already had, it was already a $40 billion company in terms of revenue. So it was, that was not a small company. And so we've got to challenge our notion that, and we can certainly accept that if small is beautiful, which I think it is, it doesn't mean big has to be ugly. I think that's the notion the book challenges. And what the book argues is that if large companies are unable to be transformative innovators, it's not because of their scale per se, it's because of how they're designed and managed. And the DNA of all organizations is quite mutable. It's hard, but it's mutable, unlike our own DNA, which is much harder to change.
So let's unpack some of this. Should a company, if they want to innovate, if a large scale company wants to innovate, why not just buy a smaller company?
It sounds, a lot of companies try to do that, but it's not as easy as that. The first problem you get into is that you pay a lot for good acquisition. So if you've got small companies that prefer to wait and sort of just acquire, if you look at some of the costs of acquisitions in pharmaceuticals, where large companies go out and buy small companies with one drug and pay $15 to $20 billion, there's just not a lot of value that you're creating for your shareholders. All you're doing is transferring your shareholders' wealth to the acquired company's shareholders. So it's, if you can buy it, so can your competitors, and good stuff attracts a lot of attention, and that's true in a lot of industries. The second thing is that if you think about a company who is struggles with innovation, they don't have a very innovative culture, they don't have the right systems, their strategy is not particularly oriented around innovation. If they go out and acquire an innovative company, what's the chance of the that company staying innovative, that organization staying
Right. There's just
innovative?
gonna be a culture. There's just gonna be a cultural breakdown. It's just gonna become a part of the parent company.
Exactly. I mean, if you think I used an example once in a workshop, I don't use this in the book, but you know, if you're a bad parent and then you just go get some other kids, you're not, it's like you're still a bad parent. And so you got to solve your parenting problems. It's just, you can't get new kids, right? And so, that's what a lot of companies do. They say, well, we can't innovate, and it becomes self-fulfilling. They say we have to acquire, but then what they acquire ends up not being sort of sustainable for them.
So set the parameters. When you say innovation, what do you mean by that?
Well, great question. There's a lot of types of innovation. And one of the things I try to do in the book is lay out a framework to provide managers a clear sense of the different types of innovations and the way those different types of innovations can create value. So there's what I call routine innovation. I think about innovation in two dimensions: the degree of technological advance, which is the more familiar notion to us. You know, how technologically different is it than what's out there, and the degree to which the business model is different. And that's less familiar, but it's equally important. And so I lay out four types of innovation. Routine is where something that exploits your existing business model and builds on your existing technological competencies. And then the other types.
So let's think
Sure.
about routine
Yeah,
innovation.
yeah,
Give an example of where do you see routine innovation, and sometimes it gets a bad rap.
yeah, it does. Yeah, and it doesn't. It shouldn't. I mean, okay, let's think about routine innovation. Apple, Apple. I'm sorry, the iPhone 3, the iPhone 4, the iPhone 5, the iPhone 6, the iPhone 6s, the iPhone 7, iPhone 8, iPhone 10, right? And I think I just saw an ad last night for the iPhone 10R. And so you're right, it gets a bad rap. But think about Apple. When Apple launched the iPhone, its market cap was about $200 billion. As of a few months ago, it hit a trillion. It's down with the market correction. I think it's down to about 700 or 800 billion now. But it's increased, depending on when you measure it, from four to fivefold. And you say, where did that 400 billion, 400 to 800 billion dollars in value come from? Well, it came from all the routine innovation they did after the introduction of the original iPhone. If Apple had just not changed the iPhone, if we were all still using the original iPhone. In fact, I found my original iPhone, funny enough, in my drawer. I was cleaning out my drawer the other day. I'm going to keep it. It's like a collector's item. I wouldn't touch that thing. I mean, I looked at it. It's almost, we were impressed at the time, but had
Right.
they just stayed with that, well, we wouldn't be talking about Apple today the way we talk about them.
So what you're talking about is just the basic. So the iPhone itself was a disruptive innovation, but once they had the iPhone, then Apple was in a position where they had to just do routine incremental
Yeah.
innovations to it, like adding in new app features, new screen sizes, new processing power, those kind of things.
Right, exactly, and that kind of routine innovation creates massive amounts of value. I think as Apple demonstrates. I mean, most of the value came from the routine innovation that came after. So I like to think about the first. The people say disruptive, but I'd say transformational. 'Cause I think disruptive innovation is one type of transformative innovation. There's other types. So I think about the transformative innovation as creating the platform, creating the option, and you exploit that option through your sequence of routine innovation. And so there's lots of examples of routine innovation out there. I mean, most innovation is routine. Most economic growth comes from routine innovation, not the transformative, not the disruptive types. Economies and companies need to do both. And they need to do them in the right balance. But think about a car company coming out with a next generation of very sophisticated vehicle, or think about Boeing coming out with a new aircraft. That's a very complex and expensive undertaking. Nothing easy about it. But for Boeing to launch, say, a next generation aircraft, even when they put out the 787, it's a fairly, new type of jet. But it builds on their technological skills by and large. There were some differences in that, and it fits their existing business model. It's selling a jet. Or think about Intel coming out with a next generation processor that's faster. Um, Again, nothing trivial about it.
Let's contrast that with the other forms of
Yeah.
innovation that you outline in the book.
So the term the disruptive is often used, and also let me talk about disruptive. If you go back to the original, and of course the term disruptive innovation was coined by my colleague here at Harvard, Clay Christensen, and it's a powerful notion that says, look, the magic is not in the technological advance. So disruptive innovations are kind of pure business model innovations. That's what makes them difficult. So people throw the word around disruptive, but in fact, if you the way Clay talks about it, the way he writes about it, is it's about business model innovation. And so you think about car sharing as a disruptive innovation for car companies. If that's a very different business model. Notice there's nothing technologically complicated or magical about car sharing. I mean, there's some technology, but that's not what makes it hard for a car company to do. What makes it hard for a car company to do is it's not about selling cars, it's about selling the service. So that's disruptive. Now you can think about the opposite kind of quadrant is something where, in fact, it reinforces your business model, but it's technologically very complex or very difficult.
We're talking about the differences between disruptive technologies, disruptive innovations, and more routine innovations.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, the distinction I make is, look, we'll keep it simple. There's 4 types of innovation I talk about in the book: routine, disruptive, radical, and architectural. But, fundamentally at some level, you could think about there's 2 broad types. There's the routine innovation, which builds on your existing business model and your existing technological base. And then the 3 others are transformational. They either change some combination of the technology base and or your business model base. So while the term disruptive gets thrown around a lot, it's become a catch-all. If you kind of go back to the way Christensen has talked about it and the way he writes about it, he really means it's about disruptive business model innovation.
So for those listeners who don't really understand, what would a business model innovation be?
So something like, take ride sharing, and if you're a car company, let's say you're Ford or you're General Motors, and there's a shift in the market going on that with ride sharing, and so think about services like Uber, that some customers who might have gone out and bought a car are saying, well, no, I don't need a car. I'll acquire the services of a car when I need it. There's not a lot of technological magic in there. There's some, but if you're a car company, that's a really challenging business model problem because you make your money selling cars at a margin above the cost of the car. And now that's a service model. And that's a very different way to make money. So, and that's disruptive for them in the sense that it's a very different way to make money, and it threatens their very core of how they make money. So that's an example of disruptive. But if you take electric vehicles, I mean, people talk about electric vehicles as disruptive. They're not in the business model sense so far. They've been what I call radical.
They're just right. So an electric vehicle, it's just like another car.
Yeah, it's from an economic point of view, like it's a car. It happens to be electric. Now, technologically, it's very difficult to develop an electric vehicle, and there's totally different competencies, as you might imagine, in terms of, you don't need internal combustion capabilities, but you need to understand batteries and electrification, et cetera. But if you look at least today, the way electric vehicles are sold, they are basically sold as cars. So you buy them and the companies, or lease them, and the companies make their money the same way that other, they've always made. So that's a radical innovation. And then you could think about what I call architectural innovation combines its technological, it's kind of technologically radical for the company. It's profoundly different, but it also requires a shift in business model. And
right, yeah. So the example, right, that you discussed is something like digital cameras.
Yeah.
And so what makes that so different? The idea of a new digital camera, let's say in the early 2000s.
Well, if you think about Kodak and Polaroid, so digital was challenging for 2 reasons. One is they had to figure out a whole bunch of new competencies in things like electronics and electrical sensors and software. Their capabilities were in more chemical, material technologies, mechanical technologies, so fundamentally different manufacturing process. So digital was technologically a whole new base for them, but it was also a different business model because companies like Kodak and Polaroid made their money on the disposables, and that's not how, in digital, that's not how money was made. So, and I give other examples. Personalized medicine, I think, is a contemporary one today where coming up with medicines which are targeted to either individuals or small subpopulations of patients is technologically very challenging and very difficult to hold new bodies of science that companies have to master to be able to do that. But there's a second problem, which is equally challenging, is you have to figure out how to make money doing that. So rather than selling one pill, that for $6 billion to a few 100,000 patients a year, you're now talking about selling very small numbers of highly customized products at very, very high prices. That's not the way, if you're a large pharmaceutical company, that's not the way your infrastructure is set up. That's not the way your asset base is set up. So from a business model point of view, it's really hard. So that's an architectural innovation in that it requires both, fundamental shifts in your technological capabilities, but also fundamental shifts in your business model. So we think about architectural, radical, and disruptive as three different types of transformational innovations.
So I think part of the book that you do very nicely is going through some stories, some business history that illustrates some of these concepts. And I think for our listeners that have not really thought that much through how business models might change the landscape of what you buy and what you experience, and how technology changes that as well, I think maybe we go through a couple of examples. Let's think about MySpace versus Facebook. So what happened to MySpace, and why did they fall off the planet? I definitely remember being on MySpace. What happened?
Well, and it's worth keeping in mind that at one point, I believe it's in the book, the exact year, and I don't remember it off the top of my head, but around 2006, MySpace had more visitors than Google. Okay, so, the fall, or it could have been 2004, the fall from grace for them was fairly quick. In essence, it's a great example of not doing the following up with the routine innovation. That is, they actually had their site just didn't improve. The experience wasn't good. They didn't do all the rest of the incremental and routine innovations that they needed to do to enhance functionality, build a compelling business model. So again,
what would it have looked like for them to have responded effectively to the Facebook challenge?
Well, I think it's building up. There's only, you think about Facebook, they've added a massive amount of functionality to their core platform over time. So, we first would go on Facebook. It was a kind of small number of, fans, the small number of potential users, and we could use it to connect to our friends with just really text, and then then some pictures, and then videos, and then there was ads, and their business model evolved. And so there's no reason, I think. History is it's always 20/20 hindsight. What could have happened? But there's no reason why MySpace couldn't have been Facebook. That's a story that's played out many times before, where the innovator, the first to market, the potential quote-unquote disruptor is not successful. And I think it comes from not having a good strategy around how do you follow up with that initial platform. What's the stream of routine innovations that you're going to make to enhance the value that you can create and capture?
And you discuss Dell as an example of someone not really mastering technology, but mastering a business model. So how did you think of that?
Sorry, we cut out there a little. Which company was that?
Dell.
Yeah. Dell is a great example of being a business model innovator. In fact, if you look in the world of personal computers, the sort of Wintel world, that is companies like IBM and Dell and Compaq and Hewlett-Packard and many others who were, Acer, they were using basically an Intel microprocessor, an Intel architecture, and the Windows operating system. Almost none of those companies made money because you couldn't make money, because you couldn't really capture any value, because all the value flowed back to Microsoft and Intel. But Dell was an exception. Dell made a lot of money.
So I want to jump into that point before we get to what Dell did, right? Because one of the issues is that a lot of times you can be really innovative, but the end result is not profitable, and so companies who do that just go down an endless rabbit hole, right?
Absolutely. You have to both create and capture value. If you create, personal computer manufacturers created a lot of value for the world. They just didn't capture any of it. The prices, there was nothing left for them after you kind of basically paid Microsoft and you paid Intel for those key components, which determined the performance of the system. It's like, what else were they really adding? There was nothing left there for them to capture. So, but But Dell's model was different by creating a business model innovation and, of course, backing it with fairly sophisticated supply chain operations. They could offer something different to the customer, which was a kind of quasi-make-to-order, customized machine, and be able to deliver it quickly and very, very efficiently, super efficiently. And so that was a business model innovation. They were successful because of their business model. And you see this play out time and again. I mean, look in the airline industry. If you look at the success of discount carriers going back to companies like Southwest for, several decades, or more recently in Europe, Ryanair over the last couple of decades. I mean, there's no technological, they're using basically the same airplanes as everybody else. They're using the same crews as everybody else. They're landing at roughly the same airports as everybody else. They have to follow the same, regulations as everybody else in terms of, whether it's FAA or European Aviation Authority regulations. I mean, it's not about new technology per se. They never really have technological advantages. It's all about their business models, and they create and capture a lot of value through business model innovation.
So one of the ideas that Apple has made famous, was actually maybe famous before Apple, is this idea that you should self-cannibalize your own products.
Yeah.
So Apple did so with the iPod, right? The iPod was the golden goose that continued to lay golden eggs, and Steve Jobs famously said, well, if the iPod is going to be killed by the phone, we should be the ones to do it. And so he created the iPhone. And because of that and many other examples, that's become just accepted wisdom that it's a good thing to cannibalize your own products. You take issue with some of that. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the cliche that if you don't eat your own lunch, someone else will, and it's become, like so many cliches, tiresome. But as I point out in the book, this one offends for a more profound reason, which is, in fact, it can often be wrong. So there's times where, yes, that is the right decision, where you want to self-cannibalize, but there's many times you don't. And I think there's two problems with the eat your own lunch logic, or that it makes it a lot more complex. So the first is that it is very difficult to predict, in general, technological trends. So in hindsight, there's a whole cottage industry of people who are futurists who can always tell you after the fact why things look so painfully obvious. But, technological evolution is a little like biological evolution. It's easy to explain in reverse, but when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to predict where things are going. And technological systems are complex, and there's a lot of interacting variables and nonlinearities.
Because if you're to be able to predict where technology is going to go, you have to know the behavior of consumers, interest rates. You need to know governments. You need to know regulations.
Competing technologies, what is going on with competing technologies, enablers, infrastructure, et cetera. There's many, many variables that come together.
Yeah, Bill Gates said in 2004 that spam will be a thing of the past in 2 years.
Yeah. And I don't think it is.
Right. No, and it doesn't disappear. It's just illustrates, right, that it's really difficult to predict.
Gordon Moore. The Gordon Moore, you're talking about a technological visionary. We have a law named after him, Moore's Law. He completely couldn't predict. He thought personal computers would be a novelty for the home. He didn't think it was a market there at all when he first saw it. So these are sophisticated, very intelligent people, incredibly plugged into the technological world, and yet it's difficult for them. And so I think the lesson there is, before you go off and eat your own lunch, are you really sure that thing is coming along? And you can be wrong in both directions. You can miss things. We obviously, sometimes we miss things. Things happen faster than we expect, and sometimes they happen a lot slower. So, the demise of the incandescent light bulb has been predicted it's been for 50 years. Now it's starting to happen. Electric vehicles is a great example today. Are electric vehicles coming? Sure. Someday I think all cars will be electric. When? That's a little harder to predict. 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, 30 years. And if you're Ford Motor and you have to make billion-dollar investments in engine plants, that, a difference of 5 years matters. So, to go off and tell car companies, eat your own lunch, you better become all electric. That's a little, that's just not very good advice when you have high levels of uncertainty. You have to hedge, you have to probe, you have to keep options open. But
how do you go about doing that? So given all the uncertainty with technology, and pretty much every company and institution can be taken out by technology, how would you ever go about making this kind of decisions?
Well, I actually think we'll go back to the car company example. My sense is many of them have actually approached this the right way. They sometimes get criticized for being too slow, but car companies have been investing in alternative powertrain technologies for decades. I mean, General Motors was looking in hydrogen fusion technology for for at least a couple of decades now, and the same with electric vehicles. So the first thing you could do is it's not it's not it's not all or nothing. It's like, okay, here's something that might be happening. Let's run a small experiment. Let's get a small R&D effort going. Let's try some exploratory research. Let's try to understand the technology, because if you start to build those capabilities inside long in advance, you also become much more sophisticated at understanding the realities and the constraints of the technology.
Right.
And put you in a better position to pounce.
So it's kind of like having a diversified portfolio, right? You don't throw everything into one stock. You want a diversified portfolio, because the truth is that you're not sure what's going to happen.
Exactly.
And I think there's a myth out there because of hindsight, because of Monday morning quarterback, that such and such a company should have bet the bank or bet the farm on this one innovative idea or this one technology. And the truth is that, one, they couldn't have known that. And then second, even in the moment, they probably should have been prototyping and beta testing a bunch of different options.
Exactly. So some degree of portfolio diversification, exploration. You can't invest in everything, obviously, but you have to be use judgment and around where you invest. But it is learning and it is exploring. And I'd actually argue, going back to the Apple case, I mean, the iPhone is more of an evolution of the iPod. It's not that. I mean, first of all, cell phones have been around. So mobile phones have been around. Smartphones have been around. Apple wasn't the first. They weren't like, so to see that writing on the wall was a little different than a case where something is further off. But then the second issue becomes that we often ignore. So one is just dealing with technological uncertainty. Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Is this business model going to be for real, or is it not going to be for real? Because everybody presumes that every new idea is great, but actually, most things fail. But the second thing is it's actually more troubling in some sense, which is not every disruption or every transformational innovation, every dramatic change in an industry leads to a more profitable structure of the business. There's this presumption that what's new must be more profitable, therefore you should have jumped on it. But as the example of digital photography shows, nobody's made money in digital. Why? Because the technology shifted the fundamental economics of that business in a way where it was very hard to capture value for anyone. The fundamental technologies are out there. They're basic technologies that lots of players have access to. They're supplied by, there's many suppliers. So it leads to vicious competition, and profits go, essentially been zero. So should Kodak, knowing this was coming down the pike, should they have just refunded all their money to their investors, paid off their debts, and gone on vacation? Well, there's an argument. There's an argument here. This is where and I talk about this in the book, you sometimes get these situations. You have to assess how imminent is the threat. So that's the first issue. Is this certain? How certain or not? At some point, these threats do become certain. But then the second issue is, or the probability goes up. The second issue is this good news for us or bad news? If you go back to Apple, if they thought, mobile phones were going to start to play music and become multifunction devices, not only would that kill the iPhone business, but actually you could look at, in fact, that would be mobile phones were commoditizing until the iPhone. So by creating the iPhone, you create a high value added phone, which is very profitable. So that's actually a good move to make. So sometimes these transitions, you want to jump on them, because actually as the incumbent, you're not just eating your own lunch, you're actually getting a better lunch. That's good news. But there's this other class of problems, other class of situations where it's really, you're like stuck between a rock and a hard place, because the thing is definitely coming, right? The change is coming, the writing's on the wall, there's no more wishing it away. And yet, if you do the analysis and look realistically at what's going to happen in the industry, you realize this is just not going to be profitable for us. Like, this is just like, if we eat our own lunch, we've got a profitable lunch and we're going to throw it out and do something that's like a commodity. That was not the situation Apple was in, by the way. By moving the way they did, they were able to get into a very profitable space. Kodak, on the other hand, had a big problem, which is, digital wasn't going to be profitable. And so that was the problem. So what do you do in that situation? I think there's two things you can do. So certainly one, some people might argue, you know what? At some point, you got to recognize the party's over, give the money back to the shareholders, let them reinvest. Don't squander the money. And sometimes that's all you can do. But I think you can be a little more aggressive than that in a couple of ways. So one is actually a strategy that I call defend and extend, which is to recognize that, look, your core business is going to go away. But you know what? There's a big difference between it going away in 5 years versus 10 years versus 20. So sometimes you can get these. My colleague Dan Snow has called these last gasps, that you can actually extend out the runway of a declining technology. Look at propellers, powered aircraft. So the jet engine largely replaced the propeller plane, but we still have propeller planes today. So you extend out the functionality, find new niches. So there might have been, I don't know if Kodak could have done that. But the second thing to do is to just pivot, to find a different business that utilizes your capability. So Kodak had real strengths in materials, technologies, and chemicals. That might have been the right direction for them to go in. And so it's not just, going full speed ahead into the new technology or the new business, but actually finding ways to pivot and utilize what you've got.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the role of leadership and how leaders create innovative cultures, and some of your findings on that. And if you could just comment on the role of leadership in changing the innovation structure of a company.
It's huge. I mean, I think it's the fundamental challenge. What I call the leaders who can do this in an existing company, creative constructors. And the analogy is, it's like the challenge of doing it in an established company versus a startup is you don't get to start with a blank slate. So you've got an existing business, you've got existing businesses to defend, you've got existing processes, procedures, and cultures, and so it's like remodeling a home. Sometimes it's easier to build a new home than to remodel one while you're living in it. And that's what you're doing. You're doing a major renovation while you're living in the home. And that takes real leadership.
So this would be right. So this is a company that you read an article, or it's on almost every single company webpage, that they're going to become or transfer into an innovative company.
Yeah.
We think of you think of companies that are in they're old, like a Coca-Cola, or a railroad, or some really established company, and they decide that they're going to take on an innovation culture.
Yeah.
So what would that mean, and what would the leaders have to do to make that happen?
Well, there's a few things before you even get to culture. So if you're a company like a Coca-Cola, or a company that's been in an industry where you haven't had a lot of transformational innovation, so the first thing is you come back to strategy. What's the balance? What does innovation mean for us? What type of innovation are we going to pursue? Innovation's a nice word. It's thrown around. It's way overused, and it means everything, and therefore means nothing. So you have different people in the organization. It becomes almost a buzzword, and you have to be really clear about, is this about doing a lot more routine innovation? Is this business model innovation? Is this technological innovation? Are we trying to change our business model to evolve with technology? Is it architectural? What are we trying to do, and how is this going to help us? And the leadership has to create a clear vision about what it is and a clear strategy about what it is they expect innovation to do for the company. Here's why we're innovating, and these are the kinds of innovations we want to go after. That's step one. The second piece of this as leaders is really the architects of the system. It takes different sets of capabilities to innovate than it does to, say, run routine operations. And if you're going to do transformational innovation, you have to have different innovation systems and processes than you have for routine. If you're a great routine innovator and you try to use those same systems and processes for transformational innovation, it's not going to work. Those systems were never designed for that. So it's like you have to build a new innovation engine, and you have to build it from the ground up. You can't, there's no 5 steps. Companies sort of look for best practices. They go out and hire a consulting firm and say, well, we want to be an innovator. Tell us what we need to do. And it's much harder.
You get a PowerPoint. You can get a PowerPoint. It's a $100,000 PowerPoint with 5 slides.
And I've seen this at so many pharmaceutical. I do a lot of work in the pharmaceutical industry, and they've all grappled with, and I see them all many of them installing the same innovation process. And it's like bespoke tailoring. You have to build it from the ground up. What's right for you is not necessarily what worked for Apple. What worked for Google is not necessarily right for you. Think about your strategy. Think about what you're trying to accomplish. Think about your geography. Think about your constraints. Think about your resources. And you have to build it from the ground up and build the right systems. And then the final step is the culture. And this is huge because it's like the software that runs the engine. And I think the biggest mistake companies make in trying to build an innovative culture is there's kind of two mistakes. One, they don't take culture seriously enough. They just pay it lip service when culture is gut wrenching to an organization to change. In fact, it's worse than that. If you think about culture, cultures of organizations define who's important in an organization and what's important. So for some group of people inside the company, they are important. The existing culture makes them important and powerful, and that's a good place to be. And they don't want to not be important, so they resist it. So you have to recognize that if you're going to do a cultural transformation, it's war. It's organizational war.
So you're going to get you're going to get a ton of pushback from anybody that has a vested interest in keeping things exactly as it is.
Absolutely. And the second problem, and then perhaps more deeply, and I think this is where, as innovation writers, we've got to do a better job conveying the reality. And what I tried to do in the book is that the hard truth of innovative cultures is they're brutal, they're difficult, they're not pleasant. And so there's too much of the writing and speaking about innovation emphasizes all the kind of wonderful, comfortable things about innovative cultures. There's tolerance to failure, there's freedom to speak up, you can experiment, they're flat, et cetera. And those are all great things, and you need all those, but there's this other side of innovative cultures. It's paradoxical. You discuss psychological safety. Yeah. And so within teams or within organizations that have high psychological safety, people feel really comfortable in dissenting and coming up with new ideas, right? And that's
really positive. But that's great. What's a double-edged sword to that?
Well, okay, so you're in an environment, I think, and it's extremely important. The work of my colleague Amy Edmondson and some of the work we've done together in some of our past research shows that's extremely important for innovation. So you want psychological safety, but being in a psychologically safe environment also means that if it's free for people to speak up, you have to have the thick skin in your organization to be spoken up to. And so an organization where people are free to speak up and criticize, it's not just freedom to offer ideas, but it's freedom to criticize. It's freedom for me to say, Jeff, your idea is terrible and here's why. And that all sounds easy on paper, but in these organizations, it's tough. I mean, the stakes are high and nobody lets anything slip or slide, and you have to be able to defend yourself. And ideas are debated ruthlessly, and it is ideas, and it's a balance. If you don't want these environments being brutal in a personal way, but there is what I call brutal candor, which is if your idea is bad, I'm going to tell you your idea is bad, and I'm going to tell you in no uncertain terms it's bad, and I'm going to tell you why. And that's important for innovation.
So why does that not break down into hurt feelings and into some of the more damaging things?
It can easily. That's the delicate balance, right? So leadership's job is to keep the balance, to make sure that, look, we're here to debate vigorously, and you're free to speak up. You're not free to hurt people. You're not free to be nasty. But it's a borderline. I mean, look, we all hold our ideas near and dear to us. We are our ideas in many contexts. So when you start criticizing my idea, I'm not sure it's for me as the receiver of that feedback. I'm not sure that I can, sorry, I coughed there. I may have to cut that one out. As me as the receiver of that feedback or that criticism, I'm not sure it's so easy for me to separate out you're criticizing my idea versus me if it's something I've been working on for a year.
Right. So high psychological safety, it makes a higher risk environment. But
it is.
But if people agree that is what's going to lead to innovation and lead to better outcomes, then if everybody's agreeing that that's just the world that we live in, that it's tackle football or whatever the rules are, then you can have better ideas come forward.
Well, and so you have to get and there's other paradoxes, right? So everybody talks about you have to have, the tolerance for failure, but these organizations, when you look at highly innovative organizations, they don't tolerate incompetence. So there's a big difference between trying something thoughtful that didn't work out and having a bad design. And they fire people routinely. You look at most startup cultures, people always use startup cultures as the benchmark. There's not a lot of tolerance for failure. If you're a startup, you've got 3 months of cash left in the bank. Failure is not really a great option, and nobody's willing to celebrate failure. So these are high-stakes environment. You don't have room to carry players who aren't A players. And, so there's an edge to these organizations. There's collaboration, but there's individual accountability. It's like, okay, we work in teams, but you know what? At the end of the day, Jeff, this is your decision. You make the call. You're accountable for it. And no place to hide. I mean, and you need both of these. So you need these behaviors that people seem to love, like psychological safety and tolerance for failure and willingness to experiment and collaborative. But you need these other behaviors that are a little, I used one, I call one set of behaviors the ice cream side, which is all wonderful. We all love ice cream. And the other side is cod liver oil. It's as if your ice cream is good if you can only eat it if you pour cod liver oil on it. It's less tasty, but it's necessary. And what happens is a lot of times in these cultural transformations around innovation, the leadership doesn't do a good job explaining the harsh realities and saying, look, this is not a walk in the park. This is going to be tough stuff. And this may not be an environment that everybody wants to operate in. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why innovative cultures are hard to sustain, because I think in a lot of these organizations, there's real hell to pay in terms of what it's like. They are tough environments. And again, I'm not saying that because I want them to be tough, but I think that's a reality of them. That it's and as leadership should do everything they can to make sure they never become personal or hurtful or dignity is degraded in any shape or form. That is absolutely intolerable. But even if you do a great job at all that and try to keep it and you keep it successfully above the personal fray, and people can feel good about it, these are still tough environments culturally, and it's not for everyone. And I think it's very hard to sustain. I think organizations get worn out. And if you had to ask me, one of the biggest challenges of sustaining innovative capability over time, I think it's exactly the cultural side gets hard to sustain. The behaviors get hard to sustain, not because the senior leaders are bad and they don't want to innovate, but actually because folks throughout the organization have a hard time sustaining it themselves. They just, at some point, it's like, right. These are tough environments. They're like startup cultures. Startup cultures are really tough. And, it's hard to do them forever. And I think sometimes people just get fatigued, and it's a major challenge for leadership to keep reinvigorating that and driving it. But I think people need to understand, everyone, not just the leaders, but everyone through the organization, what they're being asked to do, and really, and it's leadership's job to make it clear that this is the road that we're going to go down. This is the journey. And this is going to be like climbing Everest. It's not, when we get to the top, it might be really great, but along the way, it's going to be really tough, and not everybody's going to make it. You're just, why would you do that? So I said, well, let me apply to graduate school and see what happens. So I applied to graduate school. I got into a really great program at University of California, Berkeley, had a great advisor. My work still stayed on innovation, but and I thought, well, let me see how this goes, and I'll go do something else. I'll get involved with a company. I can't see myself being an academic, and then I did my thesis work on collaborative and strategic alliances in the pharmaceutical biotechnology industry, which was emerging then, and I said, well, let's see what happens. And I got a job. I got a pretty good job. I got a job at Harvard. So I thought, well, okay, well, I'm sure they'll let me stay there for a few years before they fire me. They'll get rid of me, I'm sure. And then my research evolved, and the more I did it, the more I loved it. And then, that was 31 years ago. So I'm here today, and I love the job as much as I ever have.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining me.
Great.
And I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, and I hope your listeners enjoy this, and I hope they'll pick up a copy of Creative Construction. It comes out tomorrow. It's available January 15th. It's coming out. So I hope folks will pick up a copy and send me their thoughts. I love to hear feedback from readers, and love to have conversations with them. So hopefully we can start some more conversations.
Great. Thank you so much.
Great, Jeff. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the podcast today. If you have any questions or comments, you can email me at jeffshatten1@gmail.com. You can tweet me at jeffshatten. If you like this podcast, press the subscribe button and make sure to rate it on iTunes so that other people can find it.